Thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Alyssa Muraoka and I'm a third year pharmacy student. I'm also getting my MBA at the Medical University of South Carolina and the Citadel respectively. I wanted to start off by explaining what our Fireside Chat series is. This started off as a spin-off of Beju's a virtual pharmacy happy hour. And Beju and I wanted to bring students and anyone else interested together with some guest pharmacists to talk about pharmacy jobs or careers that we aren't typically exposed to in school. So with the help of Pharmacy Informatics Academy, and we actually have some co-founders here today, we started this series to bring awareness to pharmacy informatics and other non-traditional pharmacy careers to as many people as possible. Throughout the summer, we plan to continue to have more of these meetings, at least once every other week. So please look out for those emails. And today we have people joining us from all over the world, according to our stats that we collected. If y'all want to just take a moment to put in the chat where you currently are located, since we have a few of you guys here. Okay, so thank you all for joining, and we hope you find some utility from our talk today that will help you in your careers. So we have Dr. Whitley and Dr. Christy Cheung here to talk about women in tech and artificial intelligence. So first, I'll ask them some background questions for about 15 minutes, and then we'll go into some of the questions that people submitted. And then after, we'll open it up to any questions that you guys may have at that point. But I just wanted to start off by having Whitley and Christy introduce themselves, what they currently are doing in their careers, and how they got to where they are today. So Whitley, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alyssa. And hey, everyone, it's so exciting to see people from all over the world joining us today. So starting off with what I currently do, I'm currently living or based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I work for a healthcare tech startup as the pharmacy specialist. And so what this entails is that my job is actually changed dramatically, from since I first started with the startup to now, and it's constantly changing. But as the only pharmacist in the startup, my job has ranged from helping in initial development and planning for our go live with our clients to really handling more direct to member clinical questions. And so basically I am located, what my company does well is it's really a product and services platform that's AI enabled to really help create and improve healthcare navigation, but also it's about empowering patients and increasing engagement in their own healthcare. And so I sit on the member services side, and so really focusing on implementation and execution of it. And so we have our direct chat platform so that our members can chat in with any question, ranging from, help with insurance or benefits to question about, is there a drug interaction between two of their medications, for example. And so I help in a collaborative way with our direct facing member team, answering and filling those questions, as well as building workflows of how we handle those kind of things. And then also think through on the product side and help provide, as a subject matter expertise, help provide information about, what types of pharmacy related digital offerings we could help address. So what are the particular needs as it relates to pharmacy? So that is kind of a brief background of what I currently do, but it's almost, changes all the time in a way.
Thank you. Christy?
Yeah, I graduated last year, so fairly recent, and I am on an industrial pharmacy fellowship right now. And I know in the US, typically it's a 2-year fellowship, but for us, it's only a year. So I'm just nearing the end of my fellowship. I work in medical affairs, specifically in neurology and immunology. For me, I've been interested in digital health and the health tech space since I was a student, and really pursuing a career in industry was my way of, understanding innovation in healthcare, because in industry, typically we're at the forefront of medicine, R&D and whatnot. So it's really my goal in the next few years, and as I develop my career, to learn how to help industry navigate through this digital transformation era that we're all experiencing.
Thank you. And then I want to go back to Whitley. Were you always interested in like AI and tech, and kind of, I think you did a residency, right? Prior to starting your current position.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was interested in technology since, I think, before pharmacy school, but I was really interested in technology, I think, like outside of the healthcare space. And then it was in pharmacy school that I kind of realized, I started becoming interested in healthcare technology specifically, and realizing that that was sort of its own field. And then from there, after pharmacy school, went into a clinical residency. And I had thought about, I was really, interested in like the consumer-driven healthcare space, but there's not a lot of training opportunities necessarily related to that. And so I focused specifically on kind of getting that clinical domain expertise, and then hopefully, like after that, then exploring like how I could start getting involved in the health tech space after that. So I did 2 years residency at UNC. The second year residency was focused on ambulatory care. And then after that, went into the health tech space.
Thank you. Do you guys want to just give us a brief introduction and explanation of what artificial intelligence is?
Absolutely. So this is a huge, very, Christy and I both know, this is a very, broad topic, but, breaking it down, ultimately, AI is really mimicking human intelligence. So having computers do something that typically requires human intelligence to complete. And this, in this field is constantly evolving. And within this, AI is really, really a tool that can be used within a lot of different fields and in a lot of different ways. And so I'll let you, Christy, add on anything.
Yeah, there's so much about AI that's coming up, but at the same time, there's so much we don't know. So that's what we kind of want to get across to everybody, that we're all still learning. And AI in healthcare in particular is very much in its infancy, and we're still exploring and learning how to apply it into different areas of healthcare, be it, operations and efficiency, to clinical decision support tools. But what AI really does is leverage the amount of data that we have, which we have a lot of in the healthcare industry, and it involves different statistical methods and other approaches to really find patterns and help us make sense of all the data that we have.
Absolutely. And one of the key things I think that is at its true fundamental core, like a lot of it is still mathematical and program based when you look at AI. But one of like the key differences between that and some of our other different rules-based programming, for example, is that accuracy of AI improves with experience and improves with time. And so that's one of the key fundamental differences.
And then going off that, what are any misconceptions that you see or hear about in relations to AI?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that AI is a silver bullet, that it's going to come in and be able to fix everything, or that it's going to, suddenly be able to do everything better than we thought it could before, or because it is, based on it's mathematical or an algorithm that ideally, potentially it's less biased than human processes. And I think also the misconception that it's, that it could be fairly quick to accelerate AI development. which is not necessarily the case. It can take it takes a lot of iteration, and it's a slow process to develop AI for a specific use case, for example.
And I think to piggyback off of what Whitley just said, I think a lot of people think that AI is almost perfect. It's not error prone, but we have to recognize that AI is based off of data, like I mentioned before, right? And that data could inherently have a lot of biases or errors, any sort of human error, right? So if we're training with already inaccurate data, then whatever it spits out at the end is prone to error. So AI is not meant to be a replacement to anything. I think it's really a complementary tool. That's why we keep going back to using the word tool. It's supposed to be a tool to enhance and elevate what we do as clinicians in healthcare, so that ultimately we provide better care to our patients, right? So I really see it as complementary, augmenting. I know in the media, everyone talks about AI as like replacing jobs and humans, and I know people are worried about that, but we also have to look at AI with a healthy dose of skepticism, because we're still, again, very early in terms of this field, in healthcare in particular. There's a lot we need to do, and I think that's where pharmacists really come in too. We can help to come in and feel the noise out of the data and really point the machines into the right, in the right direction.
Thank you for clarifying that a little bit. I just want to switch gears a little bit and ask, do you find any difficulties or maybe even any benefits for being a woman in the tech field?
Go ahead, Christy.
I think it's a tough question, and Whitley and I have had this chat ourselves before too. I think just because I don't come from having worked in a startup, I might not have as much experience, but I think there are certain expectations maybe that people have about women, and there are certainly more women in tech now, but there are still these stereotypes. For example, women may be more associated with empathy or like feelings, etc. So it's hard to say, but I think it's really the stereotypes that might still be present. But it really depends on the company you're working for. I think it differs if you're looking at like a startup where the culture might be very imminent versus like a large corporation. So hard to say, I think.
Yeah, I can't say that I specifically had any challenges personally, but I do know that they're, working in a company that is kind of split between like clinical and non-clinical. So you have a clinical side, and then also sort of the technology and engineering development side, that gender distribution is not necessarily equal across those sides. So you tend to have high representation of women, I think, on the clinical side, and minimal representation of women really on the tech side at this moment. But I've seen a lot of, I think, progress and definitely like intention to help kind of increase representation on the tech side. But, that is the case right now, that it's, there's not that women necessarily filling some of those roles right now. And I think to Christy's point, you do find that, there still are those kind of expectations that as a woman, you're kind of tended to, potentially fill different types of role in the team too. And you are seen as like naturally like the expectation that you will be more, empathetic, caring, clinician per se.
But then if we're going back to like the whole AI piece and biases, I think that's where we can play to our strengths at the same time, because if we're wanting to limit as much bias as possible, it's important to get diverse opinions and perspectives, right? So not just gender equality, but like people coming from different backgrounds. And that's how we make sure that the data that we're working with and ultimately may rely on is going to be the most representative of the general population on the whole, right? So when not just when we're looking at data, but if like looking at the teams that are working on this new technology, it's important to take that into consideration. Like diversity is going to be very important too.
Diversity is huge.
And then what advice would you have for students who are interested in working in the same types of fields that you both are in currently?
I'm going to take the first part of this. I think at this time, gaining as much experience as possible. Like there's a lot of opportunities to get to work with AI, like just independently, like, on your own, necessarily, not necessarily with school, but there are, at any given time, there's a lot of open shared tasks online or different competitions. And so I would encourage students to really branch out, and you can look at different online courses for AI, but trying to partner with, like, try to network with different potential data science students and team up and see what it's like to serve as a subject matter expert and take on a potential AI competition or shared task. I think in this space, really practicing and actually getting to do it is really the best way to learn about it. And fortunately, there are a lot of opportunities for that.
Yeah, I would echo that. So maybe going back to why I became interested in tech in the first place, it's really when I attended a healthcare hackathon in first year university pharmacy school. And that's really where I learned about, the promise of technology in healthcare. And I learned so much from my team members during that hackathon. And there's definitely an advantage in healthcare working with people outside of healthcare, because traditionally even if we talk about interdisciplinary work, it's really just people in healthcare, right? But we can leverage a lot from people in design, people in engineering, people with entrepreneurial and business skills. So hackathons are really an amazing experience. It's very eye-opening. So I would encourage anybody, even if you're not a student, like if you're a practicing pharmacist, you're very much welcome there too. And in the hackathon that I attended, we had ER docs, we had people from all sorts of fields and different experience levels, but I think there's a lot to gain from attending a hackathon. To Whitley's point, online courses are a really great way to start. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to, look at different online courses, whether it be learning more statistical methods to, boost my mathematical knowledge that I've kind of put away for a number of years. But there's also very basic artificial intelligence courses out there. So it's really the level that you want to get into, but start with something that's digestible, that's interesting to you. And then the more you learn, the more you'll find out which direction you're geared towards, whether it be more of the mathematical side, then you can do more of the statistical courses, or if you just want a broad overview, you can keep it at that. But there are so many courses out there now, and looking into applying AI into healthcare or even other industries. So whatever piques your interest, I think start from there, and you'll find out that there's so much more to learn as you keep going.
And then you also have your blog post that you've been doing. That might also be a good place to start off. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Whitley or Christy?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Christy.
That was a project that Whitley and I started, I think, end of last year, but we've been working on it for about half a year now, and it's been really great because we just learn off of one another. But we know that AI is a really challenging topic to tackle. It's really challenging for me personally too, and like I said, I'm still learning. So we understand that especially for healthcare professionals or healthcare students, it's going to be hard to, where do you start, right? And that's our aim and our vision for publishing this series. It's really to help you navigate the complex field of artificial intelligence and just nudge you in the right direction and to demystify some of the concepts, just to give you a starting point. Yeah, Whitley, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
And just echoing what Christy said, we really want AI to be accessible to everyone. And it really is. I think one of the other misconceptions that you need, advanced degrees in data science to understand it, which you don't. And so the idea was, there's not really, there's so much out there on artificial intelligence and so many courses out there, but there's not a lot that's focused specifically to pharmacists necessarily. And so we were hoping to write something that's kind of help you get people started, so like if you don't really know where to begin, but you're wanting to, develop your knowledge in this area and wanting to learn more about it, what is a, single easy go-to source that where you can start. And so that was the idea, is kind of building off that, and then, and then providing the tools and resources to help people go as in-depth as they want to go based on what their specific interests are. And so we've written 2 parts so far. And so we have additional parts of this series planned that we, hope will be very beneficial.
Yeah. And we're hoping to really write it from a pharmacist perspective. Mind you, while AI in healthcare is still very new, I feel like it's even newer to the pharmacy profession. Like there's a lot of research from a medical perspective looking into like diagnostics and radiology, dermatology, so on and so forth. But especially on the pharmacy end, there's still a lot we don't know about how we can really use AI. So this series is just to set the stage and hopefully, instill some ideas in people, and you can then think about, as AI evolves and starts to really insert itself into our pharmacy profession and operations, and how do you go about that?
I dropped the link in the chat if anyone wants to check that out. And
if anyone has feedback, feel free to contact one of us if anything's unclear, or if you have another direction that you'd like us to take. We're happy to hear about those comments. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then, so I'll just move on to some of the questions that we collected from the attendee survey. I think this is an interesting one for Christy. How can you get involved in pharmacy informatics in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's challenging. Canada, we're a large country, but a small population. So when I first became interested in health technology, the digital side of things, I connected mostly with people in LinkedIn. Actually, Beju was one of my first contacts. And it's really about learning from other colleagues. I have since then connected with a few folks in Canada. So I see that it's up and coming, but I would say we're a bit slower to adopt informatics as a job description for pharmacists. I would say that most of informatics is embedded into a clinical pharmacist role in the hospital setting or in a healthcare system. You might see pharmacists doing some side projects in startups or anything with a digital health component. But I don't think we have a lot of established roles within digital health yet. But I think, to Whitley's point earlier, there are a lot of opportunities, maybe not full-time opportunities, but there are opportunities for pharmacy students and pharmacists to explore this space. So for example, actually after a few years of attending hackathons, when I was in 3rd year, I reached out to a startup that was looking into personalized medicine, and they had a focus in pharmacogenomics. So that relates to your clinical expertise as a pharmacist or pharmacy student, and that's how you show your value. And I ended up working for that startup for over a year, just providing my clinical perspective, drug expertise, and like pharmacology knowledge, etc. So I do think there's a role for pharmacists, and it's really about connecting with people and finding the right position that interests you.
Guys, yeah, so I think this is a great maybe segue into some of the Q&A. We've got a lot of questions from our audience. We want to maybe take a few and ask them to get in front of the mic, virtual mic, so to speak. So I'm going to ask on Alex Vu to maybe start the process. I'm going to have him unmute himself and see if he can get it in front of us. And he had a couple of questions I think I thought were quite interesting. So
yeah. Hi guys, thanks for doing this. I work in the informatics sphere, but we within the informatics structure itself, we aren't really exposed to like being able to work directly on AI to begin with. So I just had a couple questions for you. The first is, in your opinion, and in your career, what do you think was the biggest obstacle into learning about AI? And we have this kind of like conception that you have to know how to program or do all this stuff to start learning about it. So yeah, what was the biggest obstacle to you guys?
Maybe I'll get Whitley to speak about her experience from like a career perspective, but because I don't use AI in my daily job, I might not be able to speak to that. But in terms of obstacles, it's really where to start. And that was our objective of creating this series for everybody. But there's so much, and you don't really know how to break it down for yourself. So for me, it was just like, where do I start? How do I learn? How can I apply this to pharmacy? But hopefully, there's just a lot of literature out there, and there's a lot of resources, and people talk about it in the media a lot too. So it's like, what do you read into? What do you look into to fully understand? But that was my biggest challenge starting. But I'll let Whitley talk more and maybe add on after.
I completely agree with that. Like I mean, part of the reason I really started digging into AI was because, I wanted to know, like, well, what is the actual, capabilities of what it can do? And when you start, when you read all these articles and all this hype and, and this, as we all do as pharmacists, you try to get to the bottom of it. Like, what's the primary literature? Like, what is the actual, like, study that where they actually developed the model, and what did they actually demonstrate, and what data did they use? And does that mean that, the data that they used when developing this model, does that fit what the claims are made of, like, where this potentially could be deployed in actual practice? And so it's sifting through that literature, like there's so much background stuff that you almost need to teach yourself, on the fly as you're reading through all that, because it is a lot of math and statistics. So I think it's about creating a new way of thinking about AI. And so not necessarily approaching it from a programming or coding point of view, but as a clinician, like understanding the clinical applications and clinical utility of what you're reading. And I think you're using a lot of the same principles that you would use when you're evaluating any other kind of study, just like when you're evaluating clinical literature and you're determining, like, does this apply to the patient case that I have in front of me now? Like, how do I interpret what the results of this study show? I think using that similar clinical and critical thinking when looking at, like, AI literature. And so I think that was the biggest barrier for me, was really understanding, like, okay, how do I develop the skill set I need to kind of understand the actual literature that's going on right now? And one of the cool things is, though, too, is that you also don't need to be able to code necessarily to do AI. There's, like, a lot of out of the box stuff right now. And so the other things you're looking at is, like, okay, it's almost like you have to know, the next step then is learning a lot of these out of the box models, digging in and figuring out what are the parameters that they're actually using. And you'll find that a vast majority of all of the really, like, primary AI literature is all using, a lot of it uses critical care or an ICU data set. And so understanding those kind of data sets and knowing what data is actually in those databases, and understanding, okay, based on what data I know that they could actually put into the model, I already know anybody that develops a model based on that data, there's already going to be, like, a set number of limitations that they're not going to be able to do with this. So if they make a claim that says they're able to, predict, like, at the medication level, what medication a person should get at a certain point in time, I already know that that's kind of a false claim, because I know that this ICU data set only included medication administration for IV drugs and actually had no administration data for oral meds, for example. So you already know that there's, like, that huge limitation in it. I think of kind of drifted off topic a little bit, but I think, yeah, it's just really knowing, again, where to go and where to start, because there's also like so many things online that you can read and watch, and so many online courses. So just getting enough basic knowledge to know, okay, breaking it down, like here's what I need to learn, and figuring out pretty quickly if you go down one course and you're realizing it's not really helping you the way you thought, okay, like I'll pick up somewhere else, and kind of knowing how to course correct.
I agree. Oh,
courses. I'm sorry, Christy.
No, I was just going to add another quick point. I think critical thinking is very important. Like when we talk about digital or technology, not just AI, I think a lot of people get really focused in on like the exciting possibilities of technology and maybe artificial intelligence as well. But if we're looking at applying this technology in healthcare, we really have to get to the root of the problem. Like, what are we trying to solve? What's the pain point? What's the challenge? No matter what area we work in, like whether it be retail industry or even or hospital, right? So it's not about implementing AI for AI's sake. We don't want to just do it just to hop on the bandwagon, right? So it's understanding the real problem that we're facing in healthcare, and then getting enough of an understanding of AI about, you know, its limitations, but also how it can help us, and then bringing those pieces together, because like Whitley said, there are going to be limitations, and that's where we come in as clinicians, right? Because we can look at the data and understand what's missing and be able to translate that into, you know, ultimately something that will support our clinical decisions. So we do have to be critical, and that's why we always encourage, you know, people to look at it with some skepticism. You know, what is it missing? Maybe how can we add more data to make it more comprehensive, to make the ultimate prediction more robust? And the other thing is, I know in the US this is a problem, but interoperability everywhere. There's data, we say that there's a lot of data in healthcare, but because the data tends to be siloed in different institutions or different entities, we also have to think about that, because the data we have might not be representative, right? So understanding enough of it to be able to speak the language, you can think about it as you want to be able to communicate with the engineers or the programmers. You don't have to know how to do all of that, but it's really just to be able to communicate so that you can let them know what your objective is, and they can let you know what the limitations are. So it's almost like if you imagine a startup, you want to be like the product manager, you know, just to be able to communicate with the different stakeholders internally before you solve a problem.
I love the fact that you're, Christy and Whitley, you're both looking at this through the pharmacist lens always. And I think that's where you can surface a lot of these solutions. Grace has a very interesting question. I think taking a step back, you know, maybe Grace, you want to ask it and see where that conversation leads?
Hi, I'm Grace. And actually, I have two questions. One is same as Ella's question, like what's the application of AI in pharmacy field? Because we heard a lot about like image diagnosis and all the like medical field. So do you see any like developed applications specifically in pharmacy field? And the second question is, do you have like very specific recommended online courses? Thank you.
Maybe starting with the resources, we can post this again later, but in our series, we curated a list of resources applicable to each part. But off the top of my head, I know, Whitley, you really like the Fast AI one. There's also deeplearning.ai. I believe that's the full name. That's a good one. But if you're looking for something just very high level overview, like IBM has a free online course on Coursera that explains just AI in general. So Coursera is a good place to look. Oh, the other one I would recommend, actually, if Eric Topol is a physician by training, but he's very much a futurist and entrepreneur, and he's been looking at AI in medicine for a number of years. He published a book last year that's also really good, and he talks about artificial intelligence in medicine and how we can't forget about the humane aspect of healthcare providers and what we do. So I think that's a good overview book that you could look into. I think he has a number of books, but the latest one is a good read. I think it's called Deep Medicine.
Yeah, Deep Medicine. That's what it
Yeah.
is. I was just going to echo. I think it depends on kind of what approach you want to take. The reason I like the FAST AI courses is because they follow a top-down approach in terms of teaching. So basically, that whole course is that they teach you how to use like out-of-the-box algorithms right away. So like you can download the Jupyter notebooks, which I was able to do this with like minimal like coding understanding, like, you know, barely knowing how to use Python, etc. You know, you can download the Jupyter notebooks and just like one line of code, and you can run your first like image recognition like neural network. So it's really cool to like be able to just go ahead and easily like actually go ahead and run a model, and then it goes through, okay, like it really is a proponent of just like practice and play around with it. Like that is one of the, you know, the cool things about it is just go ahead and practice and see what you could do, and just kind of try different things. And then it breaks down, okay, you know, once you're able to do it, now we'll break it out and talk about, okay, now like why does it work the way it works, and like go look at like the specific components of it. So if you kind of like that learning style, that's why I kind of recommend the fast AI courses, because those are really the only ones I've seen that do it that way, which I really like.
I agree. And I mean, by all means, if you're interested in the coding aspect, you can certainly get into it. I know Andrew Ng's course tends to be more coding heavy, but like Whitley said, a lot of the courses actually provide you with the codes themselves as well. They also leverage a lot of open source platforms that they can, you know, that you can use. So you don't have to actually physically code anything yourself. But once you get more practice, you'll start to be able to understand how the code fits in with all the concepts that you're learning, and then build from there. So I would say be patient, because like it is challenging when you first start, but keep at it. At the same time, if you find that a course is not really going the direction you want to learn in particular, it's not something that you're interested in, like Whitley said, you know, try something else, and then just try different courses. You don't have to really like commit yourself to one full course, but see what piques your interest and then go from there. I know Julie put in the chat, how about Udemy? I actually have not tried any artificial intelligence courses on that platform. I've tried other ones which were quite good, but I can't speak to the AI courses on that one, I'm afraid.
I think there's a good natural language processing course on Udemy that's good too. So almost all of these, the major open source education platforms, almost all of them have deep learning or AI courses, and there's new ones coming out all the time. So it's really, really kind of, I think, trying it out and seeing if you like it, if you like that learning style.
There's also, I'll just add, there's also podcasts that we've shared in our resources, but those might be good, easy listens if you're, I don't know, cooking or doing something and you can listen to them. I know there are ones particular for healthcare, but there are ones that are more technical. So just see which one is of interest to you, and you can go from there.
And then the other part of that question was about like, what are the applications specific to pharmacy? And that is such a great question, because I think this is a testament to just how complicated medications are. Okay, that we really don't have a lot of applications specific to pharmacy yet. And you know that there's like a lot of stuff, you see, things in the news all the time about like radiology and like diagnostic things. And I think those are easier questions to answer in a way, because that's based on classification. So you're creating like a classifier to determine, like when you're looking at, a radiograph or an image, you're using, label data, and you know what it should be, and you're basically, just training it to recognize a certain class, just like you train image to recognize whether something's a cat or a dog, and of course I'm like generalizing it. It is a lot more complicated than that. But when it comes to medications, you think of like, okay, what are the use cases specific to pharmacy? I think you have like the two groups. You have like the clinical questions you can answer, which are like really challenging, and really nobody is tackling that yet. And then you have sort of the administration process oriented things. And so simple stuff that we should be able to do now, but we're not really doing it all, is even just having image recognition for medications. So like, you know, you should be able to like take a picture of like your, like a handful of pills, and like and be able to be told like, okay, what are each of those medications and what are the doses for all of those. And then also, you know, we don't have, like, in terms of image recognition, again, we should be able to apply like OCR, so optical image recognition, like understanding handwritten digits, and you know, and eventually, you know, people can scan and take a picture of their check and it works at a bank. Can we not like scan and take a picture of like prescriptions as well for pharmacies? Like things like that, you know, like the technology exists. It's just not due to regulation and needing to validate it in a specific use case. It's not necessarily being used. I think the place you will see it being used is in research and development. So there are apps that do use AI to validate things like adherence. So AI Cure is one of the apps that certain drug trials will use. So in order to like ensure the kind of like promote themselves as the gold standard of adherence data. And so it's based on an app. And so you literally use the front facing camera and you have to like hold the pill up and it watches you actually swallow the pill, confirms that you took it. But it also looks at like your facial patterns and recognition and determines like, okay, what's kind of your mood or disposition or level of engagement. When I see talking about drug discovery. And so that is not necessarily my area of expertise. So Christy probably has more information in this regard, but yes. So like when it comes to pharmacy, absolutely. That is one area where we do see AI is in drug discovery, as well as looking at pharmacogenomics too, or just genomics in general is another area that we see it in. And Christy, I can let you talk more on that.
Yeah, no problem. I think how Whitley broke it down, so there's the clinical aspect, there's an administrative aspect. For the administrative aspect, like Whitley said, the technology exists and it's really a matter of adopting it. So I think we might be able to see more of AI playing into that aspect in the coming years, whether it be like improving operations, looking at supply chain, supply and demand, that sort. And that's also related to like the pharmaceutical industry when you're looking at like inventory management and supplying medications to different geographical locations. You can really leverage data to optimize your supply and demand, for example. But if we're looking at the clinical side, we're still a ways to go, and that's just the reality of it, because we still want to be sure that what we're churning out with these machine learning techniques and artificial intelligence is really going to benefit our patients, right? So I think it's cautious optimism. I think it's still going to take time before we really see AI in our day-to-day. But like Whitley said, in terms of research, there's a lot of research going into using these techniques to help us identify patterns that relate to patients, their medications, medical conditions, etc. In terms of the pharmaceutical industry, I think there's a lot in drug discovery, also drug repurposing, which is really interesting. I've seen a few stories about how, you know, there are existing compound libraries that many pharmaceutical companies have, or like different regulatory bodies, and it's really going back and identifying different patterns and characteristics of those existing drugs and how that might relate to, or how that might interact with different proteins, drugs, genes in your body, and seeing if there's another novel indication that that drug can be used for, or even leveraging an existing side effect of a drug for another condition. So that will really cut down the time for drug development. So that's an exciting field to look into as well. And then I would say the clinical trial recruitment process can really leverage AI too, looking at data and how to find and identify patients more suitable for that clinical trial faster, for both the manufacturer, the company, and the patients, because sometimes a lot of patients don't really know how to find clinical trials to enroll themselves into. So just helping both sides match quicker and more efficiently, because typically clinical trials take years and years. I think it's an average of 12 years in terms of drug discovery. So, and recruitment itself is a big bottleneck. So really using AI to help speed that process up will help us get novel drugs or repurposed drugs to our patients faster.
And I'll add one, sorry, one other thing I just wanted to add too. And so in terms of like risk scores, you do see like machine learning algorithms being used in this case, but a lot of times you're not always venturing into deep learning yet. And so when it, like 30-day readmissions, you are seeing, machine learning being used in terms of like opioid, looking at risk for opioid addiction. You definitely have machine learning algorithms for that. And then one of the other things is there's a company, I think based in Israel, that's looking at using deep learning for clinical decision support, as an alert for basically catch it for when a medication is ordered in an EHR, trying to catch medication errors. And this is really just based off anomaly detection. So what it's doing is it's just saying like, hey, based on who you're ordering this for, and like the clinical presentation of the patient, this is not a typical medication that would be ordered for this kind of patient. And so just hoping to catch something that's just like not typical. So, obviously there's definitely pros and cons of that. Like it would definitely catch some things, but you couldn't really rely on that because it's really based on what typical prescribing patterns are and not necessarily what is optimal or, actually accurate to prescribe. And so, there's a lot of people developing really cool things, but there's still the adoption of those and the actual implementation of some of these algorithms is still fairly slow. And the one thing we don't really have right now is really when it comes to like treatment recommendation. So using deep learning to actually say, hey, this is like the optimal medication for this person. But you do see algorithms that you're trying to do like early detection of deterioration. So like predicting based on a patient's like personalized factors, trying to predict right before somebody may have an asthma exacerbation, for example. And so that's something that would be definitely in the realm of pharmacy, is trying to predict and adjust medications before someone has an exacerbation or worsening of clinical disease.
Maybe I'll just quickly reiterate too, like these are meant to be clinical support tools, right? It's not going to spit out an answer and we're just going to dispense or prescribe that to our patient. We're really there to pick, we're moving towards personalized medicine and really tailoring therapy and treatment regimens to individuals. So the data that we're feeding these algorithms right now are all historical data. Mm-hmm. And like Whitley said, these are just typical prescribing patterns. So we also have to keep in mind that we shouldn't just rely on the ultimate recommendation that we see on the screen, right? We also have to look at the patient, but these tools are meant to inform us of typical prescribing patterns and what we could go to first, but there are other considerations that we know with our training that we should apply to supplement that.
Yeah, that is a really great thoughts, by the way, and conversations. I kind of want to say we're kind of getting close to the end of the hour. We have about 8 minutes left, so I'm gonna open it up to some of the questions. We had Vishwa, I think you were next, and you had a question on a little bit more of the entrepreneurial side of pharmacy, I think.
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I have to ask how to use informatics and pharmacy skill and knowledge to become entrepreneur.
So I think Vishwa is speaking more about how do we innovate, how do we become really the entrepreneurs in this space, using some of the technology and knowledge resources and assets you've talked about. Did I get that right, Vishwa? I think.
Told right.
Okay. So
I think that's an interesting question. And I think the root of that question is almost like, how do we prove our value as pharmacists? And sometimes we tend to be seen as like the underdog profession, but we know where our expertise lies. And I think it's really, now putting ourselves into different situations involving health technology and offering our clinical perspectives, because we know that those perspectives are important and they will help to benefit patient care. So just having more conversations with people, joining hackathons, I think that's a great way for people to really see the value of pharmacists. And also, as an example, I had a really positive experience with a pharmacogenomic startup that I worked for. They hadn't had any clinician working for them previously. And when I joined, I think it really changed their perspective and opinion of what pharmacists are capable of and what expertise they can provide. So, I mean, it's just unfortunate that the perception of pharmacists might sometimes still be skewed and we're still a ways to go. But I think it's really maintaining positive and showing that energy and the expertise that we have and driving change that way. But on a personal level, it's really, learning on your own, seeing what interests you and trying to champion that forward.
Mm-hmm. And similar to anything, like, you see definitely current research and development AI may be focused in specific areas. And I think, again, like, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think one way to be entrepreneurial as pharmacists is to actually help promote use cases that nobody's looking at right now. There's a lot of really, critical questions that relate to medication use that, people aren't necessarily researching or developing products or services around. And so how do you find, the right people and partner with them and actually explore some of these other use cases? Because I think you're, like, as pharmacists, you're going to have an in-depth knowledge and a different understanding of, like, the patient user experience related, than other people do in different areas of healthcare. And so I think capitalizing on that, and regardless of whether it's, venturing off on your own to start your own product or wherever you're at in your current organization, being a proponent and saying, like, hey, like, I think this is an area that we could potentially explore or look at, AI or machine learning, and that nobody else is, because, it could just be that nobody had really thought of it yet. And so being that kind of, no matter where you're at, trying to, be an influencer in that area.
Yeah, and going back to the hackathons and to echo Whitley's point, when you're at hackathons as a pharmacist or pharmacy student, I think you be the one to pitch the problems, because a lot of the times it's more maybe medical related problems, but you can certainly pitch problems about drug adherence or, other problems that we see and we face. And then the other thing is leverage pharmacist communities that we have, like this one, and really find like-minded individuals who are also passionate about things that you're passionate about, and connect with them and see, what neat ideas you can start up.
Speaking of passionate, I'm pretty passionate about drug shortages at this point. That's my bread and butter as an informatics pharmacist, and I think Raymond had a great question around that, so I'll let him ask it. Thanks, Raymond, for joining in.
Oh yeah. Hi everyone. So the reason I was talking about drug shortages is because I know with COVID-19, there's been a lot of that issue, especially in the United States. And in our pharmacy, I know we have issues with inhalers, especially Ventolin and just albuterol inhalers. And I know there have been scenarios where specific pharmacists will panic and decide to either halt a specific essential medication because they fear that, oh, if we don't take this certain amount, we're probably gonna be, we probably won't have enough for our patients. And so I'm curious, is there potential for AI to kind of, have this predictive models to show like, hey, there's a possibility of this drug becoming short in the supply chain, and how to, I guess, maximize that? And I also thought of another question when I was just listening to you guys talk, and the idea of patient adherence. I know that's a big issue not just not just from a patient perspective, but also from the clinical perspective, given that adherence often at times there's issues in terms of measuring that. Like, do we measure it in terms of the number of refills the patient gets? Like, do they get the refill in the 30 days that they filled it? And also the possibility of AI to, I guess, help optimize patient adherence. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many good things that you just mentioned there. I will say that one thing I am excited about, is using AI to approach stuff in creative ways. And I think this whole pandemic situation is going to produce a lot of data that we can now use in the future to help predict drug shortages, because this is one of the first time where we have a lot of media information that has influenced supply chain. And so in this way, you can use a lot of like natural language processing and like data mining, and actually try to correlate that with drug supplies. Because I think when you're talking about drug shortage, you almost have to frame the problem first. Like, are we talking about a global shortage? Are we talking about just a shortage at at this specific hospital, or just the specific state or the US? So you have to think, okay, like what's our specific problem that we're trying to solve? And then like, what other unique data streams could we pull in to help predict what's going to happen? Because you could potentially use, social media, et cetera, and like how many times people tweet about Plaquenil to figure out, okay, like how severe is the shortage going to be for that, or what's the increased demand going to be? But there's definitely a lot of, also algorithms out there that can predict what all medications a patient would get throughout their entire hospital stay. And so while these algorithms are not ideal for clinical use, they could definitely be used from a logistic planning standpoint, so that you could, at any given time, predict, okay, based on all the patients that are hospitalized at this point, these are all of the things that we predict they will need during their whole stay, and actually plan for it that way to like better fine tune what you're going to need to know like whether the shortage, how, Asper is going to impact you. So yeah, I think there is a lot of opportunity there, and it's really about bringing the different expertise together to kind of figure out how specifically you want to address it.
Yeah, and really, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's a data problem, right? So we have to have the data and enable that. And a lot of times in my world, supply chain, data has been very messy, and it's been very, it needs a lot of cleanup, and sometimes even missing. So I think we have a long way to go in some respects from that side of things, but there's a lot of opportunity for pharmacists. We have another question from Gina. Welcome. Want to get a few more questions in, so.
Oh yeah, sorry. I know it's over the hour, so I'll try to make it quick. I was just wondering, as a student, in terms of networking, what was a good approach in looking for startups to help with, just to sort of get my foot in the door, I guess. That's it.
That's a good question. I think it depends, like if you already have a particular interest in a certain area, like be it AI or digital therapeutics, and it's finding the right people that work in startups specific to that area. But I would say, really reach out to people on LinkedIn. But you can certainly reach out to people here in other pharmacist community and just have a chat about what you're interested in pursuing. And oftentimes, really through word of mouth, people will recommend a certain company or recommend a person you talk to. And I think much of my own development and learning in this area in particular has really been my conversations with different pharmacists who are interested in this. So learn from those conversations and have interesting questions for the people you're reaching out to, and you'll always learn something.
Okay, thank you so much.
And conferences too, where possible, can be a great way to connect as well.
Okay, I was wondering if there was like a certain, like, I guess, resource, like besides just like the like social media, word of mouth and stuff. But I was wondering if like, is a Google search a good idea? Just like looking up companies.
I think
I don't know.
as Christy pointed out, I think like if there's an area you're really interested in, I think searching for what startups are in that space is a great opportunity. And like a lot of them will let you, you can reach out and say, I'm just learning, just wanting to learn more about what you do. A lot of them are very open to that. and then, especially, I think whenever I was at UNC, our specialty pharmacy was, wanting to look at ways to like modernize, especially pharmacy. And so I would help kind of create analysis on like what potential like technologies they can implement. So I would just reach out to a lot of startups that were in that space and actually like, asked a lot of questions and got into what they did or didn't do. And in order to create like kind of a slide deck and analysis of, okay, here's the startups in this space and the pros and cons if, we were to implement them in this area in the pharmacy. So if there's, something or some project too that you could be involved in and do kind of like an assessment of what technologies exist, that could be a way to kind of get your foot in the door to be able to talk with a lot of different startups and kind of explore what they do.
The other thing, Gina, I'm not sure where you're located, but you can Google like local startup incubators, maybe ones that are focusing in healthcare, but you can certainly find a list from there, or you can look at hackathons and see what startups came out of those hackathons, and just feel free to cold email people. I know it's hard to start at the beginning, but you become more comfortable with it.
Yeah, and there are some like incubator organizations or other like local organizations that really focus on just connecting people and that are just kind of a networking platform. And so looking for those types of opportunities could be, I think, beneficial, or looking, for like a local HIMSS chapter.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
So I just open up the room. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves, put themselves on video. If you guys want to socialize for a few minutes, welcome to say hi. But I think this has been a great host meetup. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for hosting it and being the warm, welcoming host of the Fireside Chat. Also want to thank Christy and Whitley for being amazing guests on this session. And also thanks to all my co-founders, Tony, Brian, and David, for sending out and distributing this sort of session through our Pharmacy Informatics Academy, and giving us guidance around of this. So yeah, I just want to open it up. If you guys want to unmute yourselves, maybe share your video. We can have a few conversations. Other than that, Alyssa, do you want to say a few words?
Just thank you everyone for coming out, and if you found any of this useful or have any or derived any like tips maybe from our chat today and want to post about it on LinkedIn and tag everyone here in Pharmacy Informatics Academy, that'd be great, just to share what you've learned with everyone else who couldn't make it today. And other than that, if we missed a question that you submitted previously or today and want to ask it, feel free. Right now is a great opportunity. And then I would suggest also adding like Beju, Christy, Whitley on LinkedIn if you have any more questions about informatics or AI or tech in general. They're really great resources to have.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. All right, well, I think this has been great. I look forward to the next virtual meetups.
I wanted to thank all the co-founders, Alyssa and Whitley, my mentor and colleague in all of this. Thanks for having us. And yeah, if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out just to have a chat about careers or anything. Otherwise, we're happy to be here for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, yeah, special thanks to Alyssa and all Pharmacy Informatics Academy co-founders. And yeah, anyone, please reach out. Happy to have conversations or answer any additional questions.
Oh, I love the fact that Anna used the emoji sign there. I love. Need to get more into, I think, the clapping of hands. Yes, I love it. To get acquainted with all the Zoom functions and features here, but this has been great. I'm very curious. Hi, Avantika.
Hi, I just wanted to say personally, just thank you so much for such a wonderful, informative Fireside Chat, Dr. Cheung and Dr. Yi. Definitely your work has inspired me. Currently doing an internship with Zoe, who I think is also on this. I shared this with her. So we're doing an internship with the Harvard and Pfizer clinical informatics,
Awesome.
pharmacy clinical informatics internship. And it's definitely inspired by some of the stuff that we read from you, or I've heard your podcast with Dr. Tony Dow, Dr. Yi. So that when, you said that you did a residency, I think, in ambulatory care, and how informed that was for you going in and working at a startup. So just really wanted to thank you for sharing some of your insights here, but also in other digital media forms. So
Thank you. Appreciate that so much.
That's awesome. Avantika, just curious, how did you gain the internship? Like, is that a formal program that's offered, or like what, really now very curious to ask you like 100 so maybe to have another session now because of that, but yeah.
So I actually applied in my mind a little last minute, but I, was just getting somewhat more informed, or staying more informed with LinkedIn, which I know I haven't been very good at in the past. So I saw their post on a pharmacy informatics, and I'm forgetting, I think, who posted, but someone I was connected with posted about the pharmacy informatics internship. And then I reached out to the past intern, and it's such a new program. It had only been done last year, and they had one intern at the time, Chris Lim from the KGI pharmacy program. And so I just spoke with him, got some insight, some great insight, and just found this to be an extremely interesting area. And I thought it was an area that I definitely wanted to explore and didn't know a lot about. And I come from having a past experience as a medical scribe, so ambulatory care is something close to my heart. And just wanting to understand how we can bring that kind of clinical knowledge and combine it with health technology and kind of push pharmacy to the forefront, but also combine it with some of that knowledge that I've been gaining in some of the regulatory science classes that I've been taking. So I think we just completed our second week, and it's been so eye-opening because it's such an interdisciplinary field, which is something that we both, Zoe and I both are just enjoying so much. So yeah, I think she linked, I just saw that she linked it there. But they have three, they found it so useful to have a pharmacy intern the first time they opened it up, that they opened it to 3 pharmacy interns this summer. So we've been really lucky to have this opportunity and it's remote. We were supposed to go to Boston and be there in person, but we're very, very lucky to have had this opportunity continue despite the COVID-19 pandemic situation that's allowing us to work remotely and learn remotely.
That's awesome.
Thank you for sharing. That's really awesome. And I feel like, when I started my fellowship too, I really expressed my interest in health tech, and to see, in a pharmaceutical company, there's so many different functions that you can be involved in. So yeah, I would really encourage trying to find different teams and really show your value as a pharmacist, and just be interested and be curious. Don't be afraid. Like, we all don't know what we don't know, but there's definitely a lot to learn, and good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of what you guys mentioned earlier. It was like, being a lifelong learner. It's really that mindset, because there is so much to learn, and I don't know if I can even handle the last 10 years I've been in. Like I don't think I've done enough. Like, I feel like I'm still a student, and so having that mindset, of there's just so much more we can do as pharmacists, and prove our worth and value. It's like, I think this is the reason why we're also starting these conversations, these talks, and these, spreading that message, that awareness of, look, there's something novel out there. Maybe it's not marked in the details in the writing, like, on the job description, it's for a pharmacist. But what if we implant the pharmacist in that role? How transformative could it really be? For the company or for the organization you're going to be collaborating with. So it's just definitely a testament for more conversations and more chat about. So I did want to mention to you guys that are still on here, we're hosting the virtual pharmacist happy hour every Friday. So that's more of like an informal kind of like, I think Alyssa, you've kind of sat in on a few, Whitley, I think you were in a few sessions. Maybe you could kind of share your thoughts on those events, and maybe we could shoot you guys an invite for that. But yeah, what were some of the takeaways, Alyssa, Whitley?
Like from a student perspective, I thought it was really cool to see pharmacists from all across the country and learning about what they do, because a lot of them are involved in informatics, tech. They also came from like clinical backgrounds and might have transitioned or pivoted into a new role recently, which is interesting to me. And it's just learning more about what is out there and what people are actually doing. And everyone's so nice and welcoming, and even though I don't really talk that much, like just absorbing everything I find is very beneficial.
Yeah, I'd say that no single happy hour has been the same. It's the conversation is always are very, unique and different. You never know which way it's gonna go, but you always learn something new every time. And so I just really like that kind of setting, because you do get to just kind of chat with pharmacists, across a variety of settings and locating, all over, and just get to kind of share experiences and talk about current events and what's going on. And so I found it to be like very informative and, also great networking opportunity as well. Mm-hmm. So I encourage everyone to join.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think it's a testament to how unique our profession is. Like, we're very versatile, and you'll meet pharmacists in so many different areas. And to speak to like David's new post inspired by Kelly Carlstrom, I believe, like, we're not just pharmacists. We have so many other quote unquote labels that we can adopt. But I think I haven't had the chance to join those happy hours, but that's what you'll get from those, right? Because you'll learn from so many people from different diverse backgrounds. So
even more Canadian pharmacists in the picture.
Yes. Yeah.
Even more reason. No, I actually really enjoyed the like international perspectives as well in this session. So we're gonna have to definitely get more audience from overseas to kind of interact as pharmacists and sort of how they practice in other countries. I think that'd be really neat to hear some of those stories. So, all right, well, is there anything else? Any other questions like that or feedback from the meetup that you guys had that we could kind of improve on, or that you'd like to see, or perhaps you have an idea of who the next speaker could be, and maybe you have some leads. So, any ideas? I'd love to have Avantika on one of the events.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sure. I would love to share some insight as well.
The student perspective. I mean, right? That's so it's interesting because we actually had and they're not on here today, but Alex and Aaron, who were my two pharmacy interns with our informatics team. They were the first, I think, to go through ethics certification and kind of learn the EHR systems, and because now they're in roles where they're both pharmacy informaticists in different roles, but they're working in completely different environments. Like one's working with a health system that has like multiple hospitals, they have multiple formularies, and they have like multiple EHR systems, which is wild. And then another one is working more on the financial like billing and how to optimize that from a pharmacist perspective in another health system as an informaticist. So it's interesting to hear their journey because they started as students, but the opportunities that they had to build were almost like either very new or they had to actually create the roles themselves in some ways. So it's just interesting how things have changed so quickly. When I first got into informatics, it was new, but it was a little bit more, kind of you understood the process. It was a little bit clearer. But now it's like, well, you might be able to create your own role. How do you do that? Like that's another level of, you know, uncertainty and innovation involved, I guess. So it's just here. It's really nice to hear student stories or student perspectives from that side of things, and it'd be just great to hear, you know, your story as well, for sure. Are you based in Boston, or you said you were not in Boston? So where are you based?
So I go to the USC School of Pharmacy, so would be based in Los Angeles, but went back home for the shelter in place. So currently in Northern California.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. They're a little bit more progressive on the West Coast than the East Coast over here. So that's great. Yeah, I like it. Alex, you were on the call earlier. Thanks for chiming in. I think Alex had like 100 questions initially. Very dedicated for informatics pharmacist. Well, I hope to catch up with you guys soon. I'm gonna drop off the call, but yeah, if you guys want to stay on, feel free to. But other than that, yeah, this has been great. It's been a great meetup, lessons learned. Really enjoyed it from your perspectives, guys. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining.
all right, bye guys.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.